I have a rule in this job. I do not look up the person before they walk in. No income, no career, no backstory, nothing. I want the numbers to land the same way they land on me as they land on you. Cold, without context, without the cushion of knowing what someone used to be before they became what the spreadsheet says they are now. I broke that rule once. David walked in on a Thursday morning wearing a jacket that had clearly been expensive at some point and was doing its best to still look like it. He was 73 years old. He sat down slowly. The way people sit down when sitting down has started to require some planning. He put nothing on the desk, no folder, no documents, nothing. Just his hands, folded, looking at me like a man who has already had every conversation there is to have about his situation and is tired of having it again. I asked him what brought him in. He said he needed someone to tell him how bad it actually was. He said everyone around him had been telling him it was fine. He said he did not believe them anymore. I pulled up the file my assistant had put together from the documents he had sent over, and I understood immediately why I should not have looked him up. Because I had looked him up, and I knew what he had made, and I knew what he had written, and I knew what his name meant in certain rooms. And sitting across from me was a man with $40 a week to spend on anything he wanted, food, transport, a cup of coffee, anything. And the gap between those two things, between the name I had looked up and the number on the page in front of me, was so large that for a moment I genuinely did not know where to start. $40 a week, not 40,000, not 400, 40. The man had earned more money in his career than most people will encounter in a lifetime of reading about other people's money. And he was sitting across from me with $40 a week and asking me to tell him how bad it actually was. I put the file down. I looked at him. I said, "It is bad, David." He nodded like he already knew, like he had always known, like knowing had never been the problem. Let me tell you who David is, because I think you need to understand the full distance between where he started and where he ended up before I show you the numbers. David spent his career as one of the most celebrated television writers in the history of the medium. The shows he created ran for years. They won awards. They were watched by millions of people every week. His name was on the credits of programs that people still talk about today, not as nostalgia, but as examples of what the form can do when someone genuinely talented is in charge of it. He was, for a long stretch of his professional life, exactly the kind of person that other people in his industry wanted to be. The money that came with that was real. Over a career spanning decades, David earned somewhere north of $100 million. I want you to sit with that number for a second before we go any further. $100 million. That is not a number most people ever have to think about in relation to their own life. That is the kind of number that, if you are even moderately sensible with it, produces generational wealth. It produces a situation where you never have to worry about money again. Not you, not your children, not your grandchildren. $100 million, managed with any level of basic competence, is a problem that solves itself. David did not manage it with basic competence. David managed it the way that a specific and devastating subset of high earners manage extraordinary income, by spending it faster than it came in, by making decisions that felt small individually and were catastrophic collectively, and by surrounding himself with people who were either unwilling or unable to tell him the truth about what was happening until the truth had already done most of its damage. The horses were the thing. Let me be direct about that because I think it is important to name it clearly. David Milch had a gambling problem centered on horse racing that consumed money at a rate that is genuinely difficult to conceptualize unless you see the numbers laid out in front of you. And I saw the numbers laid out in front of me. Here is what $100 million looks like when it goes through a gambling addiction over the course of a career. It does not disappear all at once. That is not how this works. It disappears in pieces that each feel survivable at the time. A bad month at the track, a stretch where the losses run ahead of the earnings, a decision to chase what was lost with more than you should have risked, and then the earnings catch up again and the immediate pressure lifts, and the lesson that should have been learned gets buried under the relief of the crisis passing. And then the next crisis comes. And the lesson still does not get learned because the crisis passed last time and it will pass this time too, except at some point it stops passing. David's financial situation when he sat across from me was the accumulated result of decades of that cycle running at the volume that a $100 million career makes possible. The IRS debt alone was $17 million. I want you to understand what $17 million owed to the IRS means in practical terms, because I think people hear that number and it sounds abstract. It is not abstract. The IRS charges interest on unpaid tax debt. In 2025, that rate is 8% annually. On $17 million, 8% interest is $1,360,000 per year, roughly $113,000 per month. That the debt is growing by before David has paid a single dollar toward the principal. The debt is not sitting still, it is expanding. Every month he does not address it, the hole gets deeper. The properties were gone. David and his wife Rita had owned a farm in Kentucky, a real farm, horses, land, the full picture of what a successful writer who loves the track builds when the money is good. They had owned a beach house in Malibu, they had owned a home in Los Angeles, all of it gone. Sold in the specific way that things get sold when they need to be sold rather than when you want to sell them, at prices that reflect urgency rather than value. The farm sold, the beach house sold, the LA home sold, and still the IRS debt sat there, growing, because the sale of 3 properties was not enough to cover what had accumulated. The $40 weekly allowance was not a choice David had made for himself. It was something his family had put in place, because the alternative was watching him spend whatever came through his hands at a pace that made it impossible to stabilize anything. It is a measure of how far things had gone that the man who created some of the most financially successful television in history was now operating on the same weekly budget as a college student who is trying to make $40 last until Friday. Except the college student has options that David does not. The college student can get a part-time job. The college student has time on his side. David was 73 and the debt was $17 million and the clock was running. I need to say something here that I say to everyone who walks in with a situation like this, and I need you to hear it too. The money is not the disease. The money is the symptom. What David had, what he had been living with for decades, was a gambling disorder. A medically recognized, clinically documented condition that rewires the brain's reward system in ways that make the behavior feel not just compelling, but necessary. The same neurological process that happens in alcohol addiction and drug addiction happens in gambling addiction. The brain learns to need the hit. And when the hit is not available, the brain does not respond rationally to that absence. It responds the way a body responds to withdrawal. I am telling you this not to excuse what happened to David's finances. I am telling you this because one of the most damaging myths about gambling addiction specifically is that it is a discipline problem. That if the person just tried harder or wanted it enough or made better decisions, they could stop. They cannot stop on their own any more than a person with any other addiction can stop on their own through willpower alone. The fact that David earned $100 million and lost the vast majority of it is not evidence that he did not understand money. It is evidence of what an untreated addiction does to financial judgment over a long period of time. The treatment piece is what I asked about directly, because I always ask about it directly, because there is no point in building a financial plan for someone who is still in the middle of the behavior that produced the financial disaster. David told me he had been in treatment. He told me the gambling had stopped. He said it with the particular flatness of someone who is telling the truth and knows that the truth being told does not undo what the truth being absent for so long had already cost. I believed him. And then I told him what I tell everyone in that situation, that believing him was not enough, that accountability structures needed to exist that did not depend on my belief or anyone else's, that the $40 weekly allowance was actually one of the smarter things his family had done, and that we needed to build a financial framework around it that was robust enough to survive a bad day, not just a good one. Let me tell you what the financial framework looks like from where he actually is, because this is where the education piece matters, and I want to be specific. David's primary income at this point in his life is not television royalties, although those exist in some residual form. It is not new creative work, although he had been working on projects. His primary financial lifeline is his wife Rita, who has continued working and whose income is the thing keeping the basic structure of their life operational. This matters enormously from a planning perspective because it means the stability of their situation is entirely dependent on one person's employment income, which is exactly the kind of single point of failure you do not want when you are also carrying $17 million in IRS debt. The IRS debt is the first and largest thing that has to be dealt with because it is the thing that, if left unaddressed, makes everything else impossible. The IRS has several programs for resolving large tax debts that most people do not know about because most people do not have large tax debts. Offer in Compromise is one of them, a program where the IRS agrees to accept less than the full amount owed in exchange for certainty of collection. It does not work for everyone. It requires demonstrating that the full amount genuinely cannot be paid and that the offer being made represents the most the IRS can reasonably expect to collect. In David's situation, with no significant assets remaining and income limited to what Rita earns plus whatever residuals come through, there is a genuine argument to be made for offer in compromise. That argument needs a tax attorney who specializes in IRS negotiations, not a general accountant, not a financial planner, a specialist. The second thing is the income side, because passive sympathy for someone's situation does not pay $17 million of IRS debt. What assets does David still have that can generate income or be liquidated responsibly? The answer in his case centered on intellectual property, the rights to programs he had created, the residuals from work that was still being watched, the potential for his name and his catalog to be worth something in a television landscape that was simultaneously shrinking and hungry for proven material. These are not liquid assets. They are not simple to value or to monetize. But they are real, and ignoring them because they are complicated is not a strategy. I told David all of this. I went through every line of the file, and I told him exactly what I saw and exactly what I thought needed to happen, and in what order. He listened without interrupting. He asked 3 questions the entire time, all of them precise, all of them about specifics, all of them the questions of a man who is genuinely intelligent and who has been, for a very long time, not applying that intelligence to his own financial life. I asked him at the end whether he understood how this had happened, whether he had a clear picture looking back of the sequence of decisions that produced the situation he was in. He said yes. He said he had always understood it. He said understanding it had never been the problem. That is the line that I keep coming back to, because it is true of almost every person who walks through my door with a financial disaster that has been building for years. Understanding is almost never the problem. People understand in some part of themselves when things are going wrong. They understand when the spending is outrunning the earning. They understand when the debt is growing instead of shrinking. They understand when the behavior that is costing them money has crossed from choice into compulsion. Understanding is not the gap. The gap is between understanding and doing something about it while there is still time to do something about it. David understood his situation for years before he sat across from me. He understood it when the farm sold. He understood it when the beach house sold. He understood it when the family put the $40 weekly allowance in place. He understood it at every point along the way. And understanding it was not enough to stop it because the thing driving it was not a lack of understanding. It was a medical condition that does not respond to understanding the way a rational problem responds to understanding. This is what I want you to take from David's story, not the number A, although the number matters and I need you to remember it. $100 million earned, $17 million owed to the IRS, $40 a week. Remember those numbers? Write them down if you need to, because those numbers tell you something important about what unchecked financial behavior does over time when the income is high enough that the consequences take years to become visible. What I want you to take is this: the version of this story where David's situation gets caught earlier, where someone in his life, or David himself, takes action at the point where the losses are in the hundreds of thousands instead of the tens of millions. That version exists. That version was always possible. The money was there. The income was extraordinary. The runway was enormous. There were 100 points along the way where the trajectory could have changed. It did not change because the people around him were telling him it was fine, and because he had enough money, that fine was a plausible story for a very long time. The most dangerous financial situation is not the one where you have nothing. It is the one where you have enough that the problem can hide. David had enough for decades. The problem hid for decades, and by the time it could not hide anymore, most of the $100 million was gone. $40 a week. That is what $100 million becomes when you do not pay attention to it for long enough. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just slowly, consistently, over years and decades of a behavior that each time felt survivable and collectively was not. David left my office that Thursday with a list of things to do, a tax attorney to call, a conversation to have with Rita about the income picture, a framework for the $40 that turned it from a punishment into a starting point. He shook my hand at the door, the same way he shook hands when he walked in, slowly, deliberately, like a man who has learned not to rush things. I watched him walk out and I thought about the jacket, the one that had been expensive once and was doing its best to still look like it. There is something in that image that captures the whole thing for me, not the loss, not the scale of it, just the effort. The jacket still trying, the man still in it, still here, still asking the right questions, even if he asked them 73 years into a life where asking them earlier would have changed everything. It is not too late. That is the other thing I told him. Not as comfort, as a fact. The IRS debt can be negotiated. The income can be rebuilt in some form. The $40 can become more. None of it is easy, and none of it is fast, and none of it undoes what was lost. But none of it is over either. And for a 73-year-old man with $17 million of IRS debt and $40 a week, not over is not nothing. Not over is actually everything.